Thank you very much, Excellencies, honorable delegates. I thank you for the opportunity to present the views of our institution here. I believe that one of the key focal points or themes that was raised in today's initial opening ceremony was the necessity to view migration as a constructive force for change rather than one that threatens the status quo or threatens to upend the current state of things. In this regard, I personally believe, as does the institution I belong to, that the migration movements represents unparalleled opportunity for engaging youth in building cross-national cooperation in terms of reverse economic flows back to origin countries. And all around, if utilized properly, can present a sort of next phase of economic, scientific, cultural exchange between the Euromed, for one, and in terms of feeding ideas back to the origin countries. Now, naturally, here we're speaking of the role of national policy and how can we better enhance it. To this end, I do believe that the role of international governmental organizations is often understated in terms of stimulating national policy. We often find the lack of political will on the ground in terms of actually going forward and doing what is necessary to engaging migrant youth, whether in receiving countries or in origin countries. But with new trends, let's say, in decentralized networks, with new trends of being able to reach the public and engage stakeholders that are just simply waiting to be tapped into, there is massive potential here for increasing ownership, increasing engagement on the grassroots level. And of course, one of the key challenges we face in this domain is the civil society gap between grassroots organizations who are willing and eager, lack funding and resources, and national policy making, which exists in its own domain altogether. In this regard, with specific targeted funding to select coalitions and groups, we find that engaging these grassroots and bringing in national partners to a ready-made platform is often the most effective manner of engaging on specific subjects, thematic areas. In our experience, ministries or governments will often be very eager to cooperate on ready opportunities that they do not have to develop or research or coordinate, simply stepping on board with the existing. And in this regard, as I said, we often overlook this as international organizations or intergovernmental organizations. And to that end, there are a few necessities, strategic and otherwise, that we need to consider. One is that the narrative of migrant youth is often portrayed in a negative light, and I'm sure this will be reflected in the upcoming social media panel. But briefly touching on it, the issue has become one of securitization, where migrants are presented as incompatible with origin countries. It has been a narrative of radicalism and fear, and I do not say that we should engage with it simply on the superficial level, but rather work constructively to invert this narrative and desecuritize this issue, often emphasizing the labor or the human resource capital element to it. And in this respect, there's a lot of market interest that can be leveraged here, whether it's in terms of incubators and accelerators for youth and young entrepreneurs, whether in terms of market interest in accessing ready pools of labor to stimulate industries in receiving countries, and I believe this should be leveraged. With a comment, however, on the capacity building element that was mentioned previously by my president in terms of building capacity training programs, often, and this is not only a personal feeling but a professional one, the capacity building programs we hold often focus on capacity building for the sake of capacity building or simply as a KPI to check off. Rather, we find that the best results are output-oriented capacity building programs where by the end of the program, youth have begun, let's say, a YouTube channel or a specific pitch proposal or whatnot. And in this, we come back to the role of incubators that are virtually non-existent, whether on the role of international organizations or in major civil society groups. And to this end, having generic capacity building is not enough. Yes, we need to bridge the gap between skill and market, bridge the gap between expectations and reality, but rarely do you find localized, specialized capacity building geared towards youth going from a specific country to a specific setting or industry. Rather, we have cultural trainings, integration workshops, and whatnot. But on the national or international level, the focus is almost altogether absent. Reverting here to the role of international organizations in the digital age, obviously with our budgets and the limited resources that we have in this time and age, massive programs are no longer possible. It's not feasible to traditionally host these large conferences and events that bring together 200 to 250 youth. It's not a sustainable model, given the number of youth out there that engage with these challenges. To this end, however, I believe that we should focus on minimizing overhead by capitalizing and maximizing on existing technologies, on existing decentralized, public-sourced mechanisms to reach out to youth and engage with them in the best manner possible, and not only in a one-way sort of communication, but rather as actual engagement in terms of manifesting ownership, engaging, receiving ideas, directing at low cost and low effort. And I'd like to close briefly, and my apologies, I do have to be elsewhere shortly. The role of international governmental organizations is not only on the governmental level, but because of the massive platform that they provide, they are the singular unit able to not only generate sympathy for migrant refugees in terms of changing perception, but rather in terms of humanizing them, which I believe is the first case and the first step towards any constructive action in this field. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the opportunity.